So, welcome everybody to our third Taskforce Financing Social Innovation Deep Dive. Today on the topic of collective and transformative finance. Very happy to see so many familiar faces already and some faces that we've already welcomed at our previous events. Today, our deep dive today is going to be slightly different to our first two events. Because whereas we looked into rather single innovative instruments to finance social innovation from abroad, today we're actually going to talk about rather like a method or type of thinking on financing, oftentimes referred to as collective or systemic financing. And for that, we once again have a wonderful group of speakers here with us today that I will be introducing in a second. But first and foremost, I'm very, very happy to welcome again such a diverse group of stakeholders here from the social innovation ecosystem in Germany. Naturally, again, some with more experience and touch points on how to finance social impact and transformation, and some who we would like to get more interested to spark some ideas to inspire. And actually, this event today, we're super excited about. It gained a lot of attraction. We had over 90 registrations. In the end, very diverse groups here in the room as well. We have the public sector with national ministries in the room, as well as state representatives for social innovation. We have the entire area of the spectrum of capital providers, as in impact investors, impact fund managers, foundations who registered, state development banks, sustainable and ethic banks. So really a very diverse group, and all of them, what combines and unites them is that they all play a pivotal role in financing social innovation here in Germany and overall. And for those of you who are with us here for the first time, I'll be saying some words about the deep dives and the larger project it forms part of. Today, first, we're going to give a little introduction on our work here at the task force. Then we have our wonderful speakers talking about collective and transformative financing approaches. And then we have a lot of room for discussion and Q&A. Actually, this time around, it's going to be a little structured, a little bit different. We have three speakers, and it's a relatively complex topic, and we really want to get all of your questions off your chest. So we have a lot of room for questions structured into this event. We're not going to go into breakout sessions today. And yeah, let's get started. Real quick, this is the team that hosts this event and hosts the Taskforce Financing Social Innovation. This is me, Raphael Heim, Angelika Teves, and me. Feel free to contact us after the event for inquiries on the task force. And the task force itself forms part of a larger project, which is the Platform for Social Innovation, funded by the Ministry of Education and Sciences. And the platform is an online website talking and putting up content on the field of social innovation for the different stakeholder groups, which are the social innovators themselves, those who play a role in financing and funding social innovation, as well as those working in research and academia on the field of social innovation. And we are actually in charge of providing content in the field of financing or finance. And we created the Taskforce Financing Social Innovation, because we seek to make a contribution to the development of the social innovation financing ecosystem. And by hosting the task force, we seek to create a space for exchange for the different capital providers, the public, the commercial, and the philanthropic ones, in order to build more bridges and develop innovative solutions for financing social innovation here in Germany. And one of the ways we do this is by hosting the Taskforce Deep Dives, which is the event that you are at today. We already had 2 editions at the end of last year. These were more specifically looking into financing instruments. So we had the first one that was about outcomes-based contracting and impact-linked finance, and the second one on social innovation challenges. And what we seek to do is both inspire and inform on innovative financing instruments in order to, for one, get more capital providers getting interested in new forms of spending their money productively on impact, and then also do a first initial assessment of the effectiveness of the discussed instruments for the German context, but also to just have that space and build bridges between the actors of the financing ecosystem. But coming to our topic today, which, as I said, is a little bit slightly different than the ones we talked about in the first 2 editions, because at the task force, we recognize that there are many complex social challenges that can only be tackled with systemic approaches. And social innovation require new type of cross-sector collaboration between different stakeholders, specifically from the financing side of it. And we are very keen here to promote also a more holistic way of thinking about how to develop an ecosystem for financing social innovation, and also align it then to the transformation agenda of the German government. And we specifically want to address the value and the role of different kinds of capital that need to work together in order to spark and scale the most important social innovations for our pressing societal challenges. So we would therefore like to put the topic on the agenda of this deep dive and talk about how the government, alongside the impact ecosystem, might support and finance large-scale, large systemic and collaborative innovation initiatives. And to do that, we have our speakers here with us today, which is Alexandra Korijn of Twist, Dominic Hofstetter from the TransCap initiative, and Henrike Schlottmann from Project Together. We're going to introduce them in a little bit more in just a second. But before we get to our first speaker, I would like you to keep this question here in mind when listening to our speakers today, because we want to have our conversation, our discussion in the plenary be focused on this question, which is: which potentials do you see when applying the systemic financing approach, the one you're going to learn about today, to the German context, to the field that you're working at, to the challenges that you are facing, being either public state official or a foundation with a specific purpose, or a social innovator in a specific segment of society. So please take some notes if you like on a piece of paper, or you can also put it in your computer. And at the same time, we will though get a chance to raise questions right after our speakers' input. But without further ado, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for now and hand it over to sorry. Move on to our first speaker, who is Alexandra Korijn, who is the managing director at Twist. Twist is a global network of investors, practitioners, and facilitators who are actively seeking to contribute to positive systems change. And Alexandra is going to introduce you to their work at Twist, which have some great research on different approaches that have already been tested in different areas in the world, and bring in some clarity on the current practices, the methodologies, and the terminology in the field of systemic action and financing. So Alexandra, thank you so much for being here with us today. And I'll just give the floor to you then. That's fine.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Pablo, for introducing that and for letting me be part of this group and this session here to explore how this might be relevant for the German context. As you mentioned, my name is Alexandra Korijn, and I'm the managing director of Twist, which stands for Together We Invest in Systems Transformation. So that's what Twist stands for. I will share my screen to share a bit more about Twist and what we've been seeing so far. There we go. Okay. So same words, I guess, as you already introduced. So it's all about collective, the collective exploration, and also about how do we actually enable transformative change. And the context to sort of, sorry, I froze for a second, I think. Am I back? Perfect. Okay. Hope that all goes well. So my background's in impact investing, and for the last 10, 15 years, I've been active in that field. So really trying to see how we can use finance and capital as a tool for change. And in those last 10 to 15 years, we've seen tremendous growth from all types of actors across from pretty much everywhere, whether it's government, foundations, investors, all trying to contribute capital for impact, for positive change. And we've seen that whole sector grow to about 1.2 trillion, according to the Global Impact Investing Network last year. So that is really positive in terms of, if you think about the type of capital that is flowing towards change. And so on the one side, that's something to celebrate. And at the same time, we're sadly seeing that the challenges have only gotten worse. So that has at least made me pause and really think about, are the current solutions that we have for financing change really solving the problems, the complex issues that we're facing in the world, whether it's climate change, social inequity, biodiversity, collapse, all of these very, very complex challenges. How do we actually use capital in a way to actually address these very complex issues? And actually try to solve them and make them better. And what are the issues we found in the current financing for change and also entrepreneurship ecosystem globally? So this is not obviously picking on Germany in any way, shape, or form, but globally is that we found that there's a really particular mindset that's very reductionist. So it takes these very complex issues and tries to break them down into very simple parts, as we see there in the duck, and really try to tackle the tiny parts rather than looking at the complex whole. And so whether reductionist thinking is useful for solving particular issues, but at the same time, we need to also connect it again to the larger complex issue that we're trying to address. And that's something that we found that is often missing in the current financing ecosystem and solutions that we find. And often this leads to a very siloed approach. And so this is the tale of the blind man and the elephant, and each of them see a different part of the elephant and see a different issue. And the one think it's a snake, and the other that's a tree, and the other it's a wall, but they don't connect all these different perspectives together to see the full elephant in the room and sort of work together towards a solution. So this is something we see happening all over. And another third thing is that we see that a lot of capital is flowing towards symptoms of the issues rather than also the root causes. And we feel like we need both. Like, you have symptoms and people are suffering, and we need capital to flow towards alleviating that suffering. And at the same time, we see the disproportionate amount flowing towards there rather than really tackling the root issues of the issues, like the root causes of climate change or biodiversity loss or social inequity or whichever issue it is that you're looking to solve. And so the real question we were left with is, how do we actually invest for systems change, or how do we actually change the systems in the first place so that these problems wouldn't show up in the first place? And we took a collective approach to exploring that. Surprise, surprise. So we felt like, how do we bring together all these different perspectives from all over the world, from investors, facilitators, practitioners, all interested in creating transformative change? How do we bring those together to really tackle this question of how do you do this? And we now have about 57 members from all over the world, representing many different organizations, as well as one familiar logo there is TransCap initiative. Dominic will be sharing in a little bit, who's also part of our collective, and many others here too, that are all looking to, they're all actively deploying capital for systems change and looking to share and learn together on how we further this work. And a big part of our work has been to actually make this more tangible. And so we've been collecting tangible case studies from all over the world to really show like what does this actually look like. And we now have about 37 case studies targeting pretty much every region in the world, and also tackling pretty much every SDG. So this is showing that this is a particular approach that's not constrained to any specific system or any particular issue or geography. This is an approach that can be applied in any geography, any issue, or any system. You can use this approach for change. And we now are collecting pretty much examples from any and all of these. And it is something that a whole diversity of actors can engage in. So this is the current representatives in terms of the people that have shared case studies. We see a lot of family offices, foundations, enabling platforms. So that's like Twist or TransCap or other sort of enabling platforms in the space, fund managers, coalitions. So this is something that pretty much any type of actor that has the tool of financing can engage in. One thing we have seen is that there's a diversity of what we call sort of directionalities in systems change. And this is a a graph that we found particularly helpful. So you have many organizations that are working in system optimization. So these are people that are really have solutions that make the current system better or more tolerable, but that are not necessarily changing the system. So thinking about recycling solutions, like it's really good and it's positive and but it's optimizing for the current system and the current issues that we face. Then we have strategies that look at partial system redesigns. That's really trying to change different parts of the system, and ultimately the transformation of systems. So completely coming up with a whole different system. Most of our case studies, or actually all of our case studies, are in systems transformation and partial system redesign. So really that's our focus, rather than looking at system optimization as a focus. This is typically where I show case studies, because it's typically where you want to sort of see what is it actually talking about. But we currently have Dominic Hofstetter on our call, who's going to give a case study, as well as Henrike, that's going to give a case study of Project Together. So I am going to skip over this part and actually go straight to some of the sort of higher level differences that we found between the more typical impact investing approach and the investing for systems change approach. So what we see is that, well, it starts with intentionality, right? So you have to start with a particular intention. So we see that, typically with impact investing, the intentionality of change is at the enterprise or fund level, versus investors for systems change are really looking to change the systems, or looking to change the food system or the health system or whatever. And that's the type of change that they're looking to see at that level. The problem understanding, we often find that investors for systems change get sort of input from other investment professionals, versus in investing for systems change, you really see that they look for input from all stakeholders in the system. So you look for a whole diversity of perspectives across different silos. We also see that they use a whole variety of investment and capital types. So typically they won't just look at, they use sort of the full range of tools of investment, whatever is needed in the system, but also look at things to complement it with, like philanthropy or policy engagement or other types of interventions, because they find that in investing alone is not enough to actually change the system. Like I talked about already, it's sort of crossing across silos. There's a lot of consciousness about power dynamics. So how do you actually share the power of the dynamics with the broader stakeholders in the field is something that we see across many of the examples. In terms of return expectations, it's very much rooted in the expectations of the system rather than the preferences of the investor, even though obviously you need to take that into account. But so there's a much more, a sense of like what's appropriate and aligned in terms of the issue that we're trying to face and what we're trying to solve here. A very dynamic learning and adaptation in terms of measurement and management of impact or systems change. So not looking for very static impact reports, but really looking to get the information from the system in real time and work with that. And really a long time horizon. So really recognizing that it takes maybe generations to change a system. And so not looking for short-term impact or short-term financial returns is what we very much find. And last but definitely not least is also this aspect of personal transformation. So seeing that we ourselves need to change in order for the system around us to change. So seeing that as a core piece of this. I know this is a lot to wrap through, but I know we're going to have examples that kind of bring, I think, a lot of these concepts to life right after. So as Twist, we are looking to contribute to this field by sort of continuing to grow and nurture our community of investors, facilitators, practitioners, anybody that's interested in learning more. We're hoping to contribute to more clarity, awareness, and education, build evidence for the field through academic research, and ultimately catalyze more capital towards systems change. And I have a whole group of people that are supporting me with this, even a few from Germany. And I'll just sort of end on this note, which is that the people who are crazy enough to think that they can change systems are the ones that do. So but I made that my own. But that's just an invitation to engage and maybe step into this if you're interested. And please feel free to reach out also after this presentation if you're interested in learning more or engaging. And so this is my contact information. I'll stop here. And I know that was a lot that I just went through, but if there's any questions, feel free to ask them.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alexandra. And thank you so much for leading us into the topic of this like high level overview. And I think afterwards, with also the inputs from Dominic and Henrike, is going to get more clear. And I think then is also probably going to be when we're going to have even more questions on it. And that's why we have like a lot of room then later for Q&A. Looking quickly at the chat, if there's directly questions from the audience right now, I think there. Okay, that's already for our next speaker. I was wondering though, Alexandra, when you talked about like that you see these approaches coming up in different regions in the world, you saw a lot of like North America, a lot of Europe. It's all across the place. I was wondering who are usually the driving actors when you actually try to build a coalition, build a group of investors who seek to pursue this kind of approach that you talked about, and whether or not, because we felt like this is a topic that hasn't been discussed much in Germany yet, or at least not from our perspective, if the type of culture and like mindset, especially in the investing community, has a little bit to do with whether this concept works better in other countries or has already maybe gained a little more traction than here in Germany. Can you speak a little bit more on that?
Well, I guess what we're seeing is that this is gaining traction all over the world, that this is not something that's just sort of, confined to any area. So we have examples ranging from Australia to Taiwan to Mexico, all across Europe, US. So it's still very much a niche, I would say. Like it's not like obviously the dominant form of financing. The dominant form of financing is still very much traditional finance, of which, impact investing is a small subset, of which is sort of, people that really want to enable transformative change or even a smaller subset. So I would say, it's still very small and growing very, very rapidly, I'd say. But it's not sort of, that any particular region, I feel like at this point, is leading in any way. I think the exciting thing is that this is really something that I see popping up everywhere.
And then I guess Kenan just now already, well, thank you so much, first of all, Alexandra. And then we're going to just move on now to Dominic, and then later we're going to join the group together for a joint Q&A session. Dominic, sure. Yes, I see you. Yeah, there you are. Perfect. Yes, so our second speaker is Dominic Hofstetter, who is the managing director of the TransCap initiative. And TransCap is think and do tank. Is what they describe themselves as, dedicated to bringing systems thinking specifically into the world of sustainable finance and impact investing. And we invited Dominic to talk about what they've done in the recent years, and talking about their methodology that they came up with, trying to align different stakeholders from the financing community for one shared purpose, and then actually seeing like how it looks then like in practice and endeavors and projects that they are undertaking. So very, very excited to welcome you here, Dominic. The floor is yours, I guess.
Thank you. And I'll actually start by just building on Ellie's answer the question before. What we're seeing in the market is that the resonance for this work is by far the strongest amongst holders of strategic capital, whether they're in private wealth or in the institutional capital world. So those who are solely interested in fulfilling some sort of financial return mandate or feel bound to fiduciary duty, like pension funds, tend to struggle making the case for both bringing the right mindset to this work, but also engaging with all of the ramifications of taking a systems approach to sustainable finance. But the closer they are to strategic interests, whether that's a regional development bank, a multilateral development bank, a public sector body like a city government, a national government, or a sovereign wealth fund, they'll get it, because systems investing, systemic investing is about creating systemic effects in places or for communities that they care about. Anyway, so I'm gonna build on what Ali already introduced, and I'm gonna go relatively quickly over the more conceptual bits of our work, and then spend a bit more time on the practical side. So our starting point for making sense of the need space is, let me just make sure you can actually see what I'm sharing.
Oh, we could see it.
Oh, okay.
It's good.
Okay, I need to reshare. Okay, yes. So our starting point is not so much a mindset. It's more of a method starting point, and it's well represented by this point here, which represents the way that traditional impact investing currently operates, and we call it the single asset paradigm. So the idea is that capital is deployed into a single technology, a single company, a single social enterprise, a single project, usually with one kind of asset class, whether that's early stage venture capital, growth equity, infrastructure finance, or grants. And all the analytics that investors work with to make sense of the impact potential and financial return potential of this investment revolve around that single transaction. And this has worked well for the greater part of the last 2 decades and has catalyzed the emergence of thousands of so-called solutions to the world's sustainability challenges. But there are at least 2 issues with this kind of approach. One is that what might work in one location might not work in another. And the second is that even when a technology does work, simple technology substitution won't solve for systemic issues. So a traffic jam remains a traffic jam, whether you're stuck in a fossil fuel car, an e-fuel car, or an electric vehicle. So it's 2024, and we basically have all the building blocks that we need to build that low carbon, climate resilient, just and inclusive future. And because that's the case, the nature of the challenge is starting to change. It moves away from the development of new single point solutions towards the weaving together what we already have in a coherent and strategic manner. And this is not only true for mobility, but for a great many sustainability challenges, whether that's decarbonizing energy, averting biodiversity loss, reducing air pollution, or making our economy circular. So if the challenge moves from funding individual solutions to funding the transformation of whole systems, we need to bring a systems lens to the challenge. And doing so will make us pay attention to all types of interventions that need funding, whether that's technology, business models, infrastructure, advocacy that changes policy and regulation, or any sort of activity that works on the social norms and values that prevail and dominate in society. And so as we adopt the system lens, not only will we start making sense of all the nodes in that system, but also how they're connected, how they're interdependent, where there are feedback loops, and where there might be leverage points. And we do that not only for the system that we care about, whether that's transportation or energy or food or mental health, but also for those systems that are adjacent or interwoven, whether that's, in the case of a food system, you'd want to look at the energy system, you'd want to look at the transportation system, and you'd also want to look at the health system. So I'll give you an example for that. We've been running a systemic investing prototype on personal mobility in Switzerland for the better part of the last 18 months. And as part of that work, we've done in-depth system analysis to understand where is that system today, where does it need to go, and how it might get there. Somebody asked in the chat a question about the purpose of a system. Now, as an investor, it's not our role, it won't be your role to necessarily define that. There's lots to be said about how intent is set. In other words, where the impact vision comes from and who's part of that process. And the answer to that question is very different whether you work in a relatively well-functioning democracy like Switzerland, or you work in a context that either has a very different political regime, maybe, you know, is a one-party communist system, or is going through a phase of conflict. But there's something to be said about, as Ali mentioned, power dynamics and who gets to choose which future to build. Anyway, so one of the outputs we produced from the analytical phase is a causal loop diagram, which you can see here. And you don't need to read the details. What's important is that, as is the case with many systems, this is a system that consists of a great many nodes and relationships, and a system that exhibits certain dynamics. And so based on that system's mapping, we were able to develop a theory of systems change and derived from that an intervention strategy. And that gave us the strategic direction of how to think about capital deployment. Some of the things that we found won't be a surprise, like there's a need to build out charging infrastructure. And other things really did surprise us. For instance, the fact that one of the bottlenecks in this system is the lack of technicians capable of installing that charging infrastructure, which points to a need to build training and educational infrastructure within that system. In any case, this analytical basis allowed us to think about what we call funding architecture for making the system shift. Funding architecture is about figuring out how much capital of which kind from which sources to which interventions. So it's very much a question of strategic sort of capital intermediation, because it turns out that most of these interventions that do need to happen have their very own funding needs. Some are financeable with market rate investment capital. Others require concessional capital. Still others may depend on grants from foundations or from the public sectors, or they depend on new tax incentives or different subsidies, or they may depend on supply chain financing from corporations. So the challenge of funding systems transformation boils down to orchestrating different kinds of capital from a multitude of sources under a shared theory of change. And this is not how traditional impact capital operates today, but it's exactly what systemic investing is all about. So systemic investing, as we see it, is about methods, about how you do things, the tools, the mindsets, the methods that you bring to the work. It's about a multitude of different capitals along the financial capital spectrum, but also, if investors have access to it, social and political capital. It's about complex societal challenges, which tend to be systemic challenges. And it's about the particular quality of change, not the kind of incremental systems optimization that Ali mentioned before, but it's about deep structural and irreversible change in the socio-technical systems that matter the most for human prosperity. And so as you sort of step through the door of systemic investing, you'll enter a new world. This world is still about investing, but it makes you ask a set of questions that you haven't considered so far. How do you set system boundaries? How do you go about setting that transformative intent? How do you do the system analysis? How do you develop a theory of change? How do you identify leverage points? What does the funding architecture look like? What would the investment program, what would that need to be designed? What's going to go into the portfolios? How do you bring these things that go into the portfolio into strategic relationship with each other so that you can generate combinatorial effects? How do you collaborate with other actors in the system to make sure that whatever you do as an investor is nested within that broader systems intervention approach? What kind of learning and sense-making infrastructure do you need to keep up to date with what's happening in that system, make sense of it so that you can inform follow-on investment decisions? And how do you measure impact if you care about systems change? Now, we don't have the time to go into detail of any of these key concepts, but I want to pick one that I think is central, which is the one about strategic investment portfolios. Because in systemic investing, your portfolio composition paradigm shifts. Usually, investors compose their portfolios with an intent to reduce risk through diversification. In systemic investing, you actually want to amplify value by bringing these assets in strategic relationship with each other. So in other words, you're actually kind of looking for positive correlation of these assets. And it's also the portfolio from which you will expect your impact to emerge, which leads you to sometimes some counterintuitive conclusions, because if you take a strategic portfolio view of impact generation, you might add things into the portfolio that would not make sense on their own, but work great from the portfolio perspective. An example of that would be an energy system trying to move from fossil-based baseload generation to renewable generation. It might need a gas-fired power plant in there to help it smoothen out the variability of renewable energy, at least in the transition phase. And that gas-fired power plant might make a lot of sense from a systems perspective, but would not pass an impact assessment if it were looked at in an isolated fashion. I'll skip this. This isn't just theory. There is an emerging community of practitioners working with some of these concepts. Many of them emerge from, or have emerged from, the philanthropic world or the private health impact investing world. Most recently, the Scottish National Investment Bank, which is a regional development bank, has also signaled that it is interested in adopting principles of systemic investing in its practice. And that, to my knowledge, marks the first time an institutional investor has started to pay attention with respect to its own impact investing strategy. If you want to do a deep dive on a case, our partners from MIT, Alban Yao and Jason Che, have put out a publicly available case study on systemic investing to address the food waste challenge in the United States, which you can find online. And then obviously Ali has a wonderful collection of cases that bring different elements of this work to bear and show how that's done in practice. I want to say one more thing about the relevance of this work for Germany. In our work in Switzerland, we have come to the conclusion that there is a new kind of capital intermediator missing in that system. An intermediator that can intermediate capital in a strategic manner, that speaks the language of these different capital holders, that understands how the different pots of money are programmed and what their interests are, and can do a number of things: translating political vision into theories of change and intervention programs, developing funding architectures, mobilizing funder coalitions from across the public sector, the private sector, and philanthropy, supporting the development of funding vehicles, whether that's market-ready investment capital, concessionary capital, blended finance vehicles, pots of philanthropic money, subsidy programs, and then orchestrating a systemic learning and impact measurement infrastructure. And we have started to sketch the contours of what this would look like in Switzerland, primarily based on the recognition that the way the public sector thinks about funding systems transformation is relatively unorganized, and in a lot of ways uncoordinated and incoherent with respect to its policy objectives. And meanwhile, the private sector, with the big pockets of money, banks, pension funds, asset managers, aren't involved in the question of how we fund the national level systems transformation challenges at all. They're still stuck in trying to figure out how to do ESG investing, but that has usually no bearing on what actually happens within the Swiss food system, the Swiss mobility system, Swiss energy system, etc. So we believe that any system would benefit from such a strategic capital intermediator role, and we're trying to figure out how would this work at the national level. Finally, a few words about the TCI. We're a nonprofit based in Switzerland. We work globally across 3 areas of work. research work to build the conceptual underpinnings of systemic investing, prototyping to put some of these ideas into practice, and then all of the relational work that's required to build the field, the education, the storytelling, the convening, etc. And everything we do is with and through partners. You can see some of them here. And the fact that we're based in Switzerland is sort of a little circumstantial, but we have an international footprint. And if you want to learn more about our particular entry point to the work, there is a white paper called Transformation Capital. We also published a couple of primers recently, one in the Stanford Social Innovation Review on systemic investing for social change. And for those of you who are looking to get trained, there is a program for wealth owners, family office staff, and foundation executives that will contribute to, and that Ali will also contribute to in the run-up to the Catapult Future Fest in Oslo in May. And I'll leave it at that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dominic. Very, very insightful. And also some of these resources that you just mentioned were the ones that we already sent the audience in the email before the event. So they're very, very readable. It's very, very interesting, very fascinating what you've done already in the last couple of years with TransCap. Still towards the audience in the room, if you have already some questions now for Dominic, feel free to post them in the chat. I was just wondering too, because you talked about the role of capital intermediation and orchestrating and getting those like different capital providers alongside the spectrum together. And actually, we just talked right before the event on about you participating at the World Economic Forum last week, which I think was the topic of this year's forum was building trust. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about maybe on in this example of the mobility system in Switzerland, what the role is of building trust among different capital providers on the spectrum, and what you've done to do so as TransCap to and the importance of to foment relationships between them. And because we believe that here at the social innovation ecosystem, life cycle of social innovation is that so that like different capital providers need to come together in the different stages in their life cycles, and sometimes like click in and connect their financing needs. And we were just wondering, like, if you could talk a little bit more on the trust that maybe that has also been built here in Germany, and what the role of an orchestrator then could be to foment that.
I think there's probably a role for that orchestrator to help build trust, but I think this has not come up as a primary challenge in our work. I think the primary challenge is the fact that everybody's so wedded to their siloed way of operating, particularly around their specific asset class or type of capital that they have, whether that's a foundation, deploying grant capital, a venture fund deploying a early stage VC, or a government designing a subsidy program. I think before you even get to the question of trust, there is a lot of work that needs to be done around understanding why the strategic coordination of these capital flows is necessary, and why all the actors in the system, everybody sitting around that table, needs to start not only talking to each other, but working with each other, at least coordinating. And I think, at some point, the question of trust will become relevant, but there's so much to be done around creating awareness of this new paradigm of capital deployment, and then finding ways of speaking the language of all of the different capital holders, translating the key concepts to frameworks and ideas that make sense from their vantage point, before you can actually get everybody in the room and say, okay, so how are we going to do this together? At which point trust will become important.
Right, interesting. We had some remarks in the chat. I believe they could be suited a little bit more for our joint Q&A after Henrike's input. So thank you, Dominic. We're just gonna, for now, leave it at that, and then welcome you back in just a second. And now we're gonna move on to our last speaker today, who's well, a well-known figure here in the German impact ecosystem. It's Henrike Schlottmann, who's the co-director of Project Together, Berlin-based social enterprise that has set out to bring society, politics, and business together to take joint action. And she's also a board member of the Social Entrepreneurship Netzwerk Deutschland, just off as last November. And Project Together is actually focusing on pioneering new forms of cooperation between different stakeholder groups to allow for transformative social innovation. And Henrike will tell us a little bit more about contextualizing what we've just heard by Alexandra and Dominic, and talk a little bit more about the trajectory of her own organization. And yeah, Henrike, very glad that you're here as well with us. And yeah, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you everyone who's listening carefully to what you both said. Super inspiring work that both of you do. And maybe to give a little bit more context, so we're at Project Together, we're a nonprofit, so we're not an investor. So we're not a systemic investor. But I was asked by the team to share a little bit about our work because we orchestrate these large communities around societal challenges. We call these missions, so different missions that we run with stakeholders from politics, public administration, civil society, social impact startups, but also corporates, so really a wide range of stakeholders involved. Exactly. So I have a few slides. Let me just get them up. Yeah, okay, perfect. So as I said, so Project Together, we're based in Berlin, but we work all over Germany, and so Project Together was initially founded in 2015 and has since really been on a journey. So we started really by a coaching program for young social entrepreneurs, and then have evolved our methods. And that's, I think, really one of our core DNA is really that self developing, always questioning, are we following the right methods and how can we further evolve? So we started with the coaching program, and then in an initial phase brought together projects around a similar mission. So back in the day, it was around climate action. And then so that was kind of the first mission that we did with 60 projects, and then kind of evolved from there, bringing in more stakeholders from the corporate side, but also from the public administration side. And really now evolving into a model where we set a mission, so a societal challenge, and we have large communities of 300, 400, 500 different stakeholders behind these missions, and then we try and find challenges that nobody can really solve alone, and then bring together 5, 6, 7, 8 different stakeholders around that challenge to really work on that. So we call these collective action projects. And let me give you a little bit of an idea of the missions that we currently work on. So there's 4 ongoing missions at the moment. So we start on the left with what we call 10,000 days, so that's 10,000 Tage, which is our most recent one, which only started last year. And here the mission is really around how do we skill the labor force to actually have enough labor for the green transition. So there's studies around that we're missing around 750,000 skilled workers to be able to work to implement this green transition. So what are new ways to do that? And that's really quite an interesting mission with really stakeholders from the Ministry of Education all the way to civil society stakeholders, and obviously also corporates and organizations that are either lacking these workforces or have too many because they're changing their business model and they're trying to move away and re-educate them. Circular Futures, our second mission, is around how do we build up circular economy, reusing the resources, how do we build the resource transition that we need. The third one is Farm Food Climate, so this mission is around transforming the food and agricultural system. And the fourth one is the Welcome Alliance, where we really structurally look at how do we improve the arrival and integration process for refugees and newly arrived people in Germany, everything from job market integration to housing and mental health. So a very broad range of levers that we tackle and work on. Let me just come back to you. So for all these missions, what we do is we kind of like the orchestrator in the middle to bring together these different stakeholders, but we also have what we call philanthropic funds. So we bundle money from a variety of different stakeholders, from be it foundations, be it corporates, be it private individuals, and then we try and spend this money where it's most needed. And by being this orchestrator and having that overview over all of these different projects that are running at the same time, we have quite a good idea of like where also small amounts of money can actually make quite a difference. And to give you a very concrete example of what we did there, and is back in the day, it was called the Alliance for Ukraine Fund, which is now the Welcome Alliance Fund. So it was set up only days after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and we had more than 25 different stakeholders that pooled their money really together. So it was large foundations, and the German the Germans here in the call might know them from, you know, foundations from the Bertelsmann Foundation to Hertie Foundation and Schöpflin Foundation, but also large corporates from SAP, Google, Amazon, also small to medium cap corporates like you know, Fiege, Sixt, but then also private individuals, and they all bundled their money in that one philanthropic fund called the Alliance for Ukraine Fund. And with that, we were able to support collectives of projects. And we supported more than 90 different initiatives, super quick, super fast, with that money from that group of funders. And we could really see where that money made a difference. So that's, I guess, is one example of where it really worked, that collective funding approach, but also having an overview of you know, the system and where the money is needed most, and where it can really make a difference. What has been really interesting, that the work that we've done with the Alliance for Ukraine Fund and now the Welcome Alliance Fund has attracted so much attention that now also public money will go into this fund. So we've just secured money from the Ministry of the Interior that will also join this fund, making it a public-private philanthropic fund to fund arrival processes in Germany, which is quite a very exciting development that we're very much at the beginning of. Maybe to conclude, I just have a few things or learnings that are pretty key for me when I reflected on, you know, what is interesting around the investing and philanthropic scene, and also what would I like to see. I think starting off, number one is we talk a lot about, you know, system mapping, understanding the system. I think system mapping is a great tool, but I also fundamentally believe that if you really want to understand the system and the stakeholders, you need to work with them, and you need to roll up your sleeves and you know, pick up the phone, call them, get involved, and see how the dynamic really works out. So I guess that's number one for me. Then the second one is really think about collectives. So as I said, think about collectives of funders, but also think about collectives or collective action projects in terms of different stakeholders that come together to solve a problem and how you can actually fund those. So collectives really on the funder side, so people giving money, but also collectives on the receiving side, so who actually receives the money. Thirdly, these kind of collective action projects, multi-stakeholder alliances, whatever you want to name them, that can really address levers in a system. They don't just come out of nothing, right? So they need orchestrators, they need drivers, they need stakeholders that bring them together, that hold them together, that facilitate that exchange. So also think, when you think about financing that, also think about financing that orchestrator or that driver that brings together these unusual alliances. Fourth point is think about also different asset classes, obviously, and I think Dominic has mentioned that really, really well. So think about philanthropy, but also think about, from venture capital to loans to all sorts of things. I think that's very key because, social innovations have very different needs in terms of financing and funding. And then I think this was also mentioned in the chat already, but think also about investing into political innovations and really changing the policy framework, the political framework as part of that work. And very few investors and very few philanthropists actually dare to do that and really investing into that political innovation. So be a pioneer in that, I think, is key. And lastly, it's also been mentioned, but build trust and see build trust between the different stakeholders, but also build trust between the funding side and the receiving side of the and the funding. Because for if you're really thinking about changing, addressing larger levers of a system, there won't be real KPIs to measure that. So you really need trust. You need to believe in the team, and you need to believe in the right mindset. So look at the right mindset behind the team. So I think these 4 or 5 things really diving into the system to understand it. Think about collectives on the funding side and also on the receiving side. Think about an orchestrator, driver for multi-stakeholder alliances, and also finance that. Think across asset classes, think in political innovation, and think about trust. I think that these are some of the key things that I've been taking away from the work that we've done at Project Together. And we're actually currently in the middle of building up a collective of philanthropists and funders that share some sort of deep trust. We bring them together in really remote locations and really start to think about new approaches, how you can use money as really that social risk capital that we need. And without too much further ado, I'll hand it over back to Pablo, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion and whatever insights also coming from the group here that we have assembled.
Awesome. Me too, actually. Thank you, Henrike. There's a lot going on already in the chat. Very excited for that discussion afterwards. But maybe real quick, I think it's like super exciting, and congratulations on your success, especially what you've done with the Welcome Alliance, and that you now also, after pooling the philanthropic resources, we're able to get public money into the mix as well. This is the moment where I'm going to use for a quick plug for our next deep dive, which is actually going to be on the topic of blended finance next month, where we're going to talk both on public-private financing schemes as well as public philanthropic. So very cool what you've done there. And I was actually wondering, because I also remember talking with one of your colleagues who was managing the Welcome Alliance about how you actually approach philanthropic capital providers. And I was wondering what the line of argumentation and how you actually can approach and mobilize and motivate for example, the foundations and also the corporates and pooling their money for a purpose cause, because I believe that in a certain way, obviously, you might want to think that your specific contribution might not be seen as well, it isn't as as visible as before, and also very interesting to what your conversations looked like when you then approached, after you managed to get this, to pull these fundings, what your approach looked like when you then talk with public actors to get involved as well.
Yeah, so I think the mission needs to be clear, like what you want to invest it in. And then you also, yeah, you really need to have that, like, you know, large group of stakeholders that supported the mission. What was really interesting with the Alliance for Ukraine Fund and now the Welcome Alliance Fund is also the dynamic between the different funders. And we've received quite a lot of, you know, feedback that also for them it's been quite a new process to really get their money together and make these like common decisions. So I think it's also been really an educational process on the funder side. So as I said, like, you know, try it out, try and do these new things, but also be prepared to, you know, you might have to do a lot of like explanation of what you do, why it's relevant, how, you know, how it can achieve the impact that you're saying. So be prepared to communicate that well, and also do a little bit of education on all sides of the people involved.
Awesome.
And then obviously, so for the public side, what is interesting is you know, how private money can be spent so fast with very little strings attached. And now it'll be interesting to see, you won't be able to get public money as quickly and easily, but how easy, like how far can you match the quick and easy process that you can do with private money? How much of that can you replicate with public money? I'm quite interested to see that, and I think that'll be something that we'll all have to work on over the next few years.
Yeah, we'll be excited to hear about how it goes, and hopefully keep up the conversation here. But thank you so much, Henrike, for your input. We're gonna move back all our speakers onto the stage, basically, to have a shared round of questions that my colleague Rafa will pose now. So Rafa, I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Okay, thanks, Pablo. Let's take this deep dive into the second half. As mentioned, we'd like to move on into a more of a open discussion format and start involving you, the participants, into the conversation. But maybe just to set the stage, quick question to all three of our speakers today, maybe starting with you, Ali. So we've got in the room here German changemakers, investors, funders, essentially a big part of the German social innovation ecosystem. And what piece of advice would you have for the audience here in this room if they are contemplating how to implement systemic investing into their repertoire and into this German ecosystem? Maybe just a sharp 1-minute answer, and then we'll move on to Dominic.
Oh, good question. Wish I had some time to think about this one, but I mean, it's a very, it requires you to go into complexity, which is something that I think a lot of people typically avoid, is to go into the complexity. So I guess my piece of advice would be to sort of embrace it and to enjoy it, and to sort of be okay with ambiguity, be okay with sort of unclarity. What we've seen in even just in our own organization is just sort of, you know, finding comfort in that. Actually, you'll see that over time the clarity emerges. And so I would just say embrace the complexity, delve in, enjoy the sort of navigating the ambiguity, and don't sort of shy away from not having all the clear answers right away. And just trust that by engaging with a broad group of stakeholders and bringing all those perspectives together, that the clarity will emerge over time.
Wonderful. What about you, Dominic?
I would say don't get overwhelmed by that complexity, because you're not gonna, even though, so my input was relatively top down, but actually when you go out and implement some of the ideas that I've shared with you, tactically speaking, a more bottom-up approach might lend itself better for implementability. So in other words, start with a small coalition around a relatively well-defined problem where you can actually make something happen. And then the question is, what's the scarce asset? If you are a capital holder, then your scarce asset will be a constellation of stakeholders working on a very meaningful problem in a well-organized way. So if you're a capital holder, go talk to Henrike, ask her which of your programs need what kind of capital, and then work from there, because it'll take you years to build something that an organization like Project Together is building in its programs, and those become the source of legitimacy, the source of impact, the locus of impact, and where you find all of these things that you as an investor don't have, the social relationship, the trust relationships, et cetera, et cetera. Now, if you're somebody like Henrike and you have a program in place that needs funding, in some ways that's a slightly harder pitch, because then you need to go out and try and mobilize money from actors that are not actually used to working in the way that you need them to show up. But still, you can find one or two and then build a funding coalition around that.
Sounds good. And Henrike, to round it off.
Oh, and Henrike, I didn't want to speak for you. So if you think that what I just said wouldn't work at all, please correct.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. I think really is just don't try and be perfect right from the start. Like, this is a very early field. Like, nobody will do it perfectly. So just let's just all kind of try and learn together what will work and what doesn't work. I sometimes don't even like to use the word, systemic change or something, because that's so broad and so big, and it can even put you off. Just like start somewhere. And what does that even mean? Changing an entire system and things like that. But really trying to listen to the people that need funding, I think is a great start, and then taking it from there.
Amazing. Yeah, so I guess to sum up, all three of you kind of went in a similar direction. So don't get overwhelmed, huh? So we should start small and embrace the complexity of it, and go forward and learn collectively. And I think with that mindset, we can now move on to our next session and sort of open up the round to the participants now in the room. I'm going to share my screen now and invite you all to join me in a quick Menti questionnaire. This is just to sort of guide through our open discussion. It's literally just a two-question questionnaire, and will be the foundation for the discussion that follows. So I'll invite everybody to go to menti.com. The link should be in chat as well, and just enter this 8-digit code. The one for those who want to use their phone, you can also use the QR code. If you want to go into a bit more lengthy answers, however, I recommend you going by your PC. And I'll just give you all a couple of seconds to arrive on the Menti. This will also make it a lot easier for us after the deep dive to sort of harvest your ideas and impulses. So that's why we're also going for this method. Okay, I'm assuming most of you have arrived, and we'll just kick it off. The first question should pop up on your screen right now. And with the insight that we've now gathered from our phenomenal speakers today, and you being the stakeholders in the German ecosystem that are thinking about transformation, thinking about investing and social innovation, what potentials do you now see when applying this approach of systemic financing and adjacent approaches like transformative finance and whatever you want to call it to the German context. Just feel free to punch in your answers. You've got quite a lot of room in this type of questionnaire. Just give it a couple of more seconds for you to answer, and then we'll open up the room for those of you who want to comment on their answers, or maybe just bring something up for discussion, or even a question maybe for the speakers that hasn't been topic of the discussion yet. Okay, we've got some great answers here already. Some of them are also not disillusioned by the approach. Would also be interesting to hear those voices speak up who are actually not seeing a lot of potential for the German context, but feel free now to answer. I can't see who of you are raising your hand, so I'll rely on you, Pablo, to maybe pick out the participants who want to raise their voice.
No hands raised before, but you might want to just pick one that seems interesting to you and ask the person who wrote it if they want to present it.
Yeah, maybe I'll get it started. I'll pick one.
Please.
On the comment on policy. It's at the top that we need the policymakers in the room. And I think that's a case for both yes and no. Obviously, policymakers are incredibly powerful agents of change in any society because they set the rules of how the economy behaves and how individuals behave. And governments, executive branches, but also legislative branches have a lot of power over financial resources, both in terms of what the state decides to invest in terms of infrastructure and services, but also in terms of how it procures goods and how it mandates that the rest of the economy procures goods. So that's an argument for, in favor of policymakers needing to be on board. The problem with the argument is that policy could be the answer to any social issue, right? Because you can mandate in a state where you have ultimate power to enforce the rules, you can mandate a lot. Maybe not systemic outcomes so much, but you can do a lot to sort of drive systems evolution. But many sustainability issues, they aren't issues of technology or business models or mindsets or will. They're just, well, maybe ultimately will, society will, but they're basically policy issues at this point in time, right? Because we've got all of these building blocks. So the issue is not, when you ask, how do we solve for climate change? You're really asking, how do we get elected officials to put in place the framework conditions for everything else to fall in place? And I think from that perspective, yes, policy is the answer, but it cannot be the only answer because, you could make an argument that it is, but that, then we all need to do lobbying.
Yeah, exactly. We've got one hand raised here from Marcus. Marcus, do you have any
happy to make the
comments?
icebreaker. Thanks a lot for the great presentations. I think really inspirational, and thanks for sharing all the insights about your work. And I think I would be really interested in, let's say, understanding more specific, let's say, case examples as well, especially if, let's say, also being a board member of Impact Europe, so formerly EVPA. We obviously see many of our members that are either acting with grant funding or also with, let's say, patient impact first capital. And I was wondering whether, as part of your work, you see case study successful examples where actually the blending of philanthropic and, let's say, patient impact capital worked out successfully and really, let's say, could pave the way for a successful systemic financing approaches. And I was just wondering whether you could maybe share one or few of those examples. Thanks a lot.
I'm assuming this is a question to one of our speakers.
Yes, that would be great. As a starting position, but as if anybody else has great examples to share, because also from our experience with 10 years now with FASE, is contributing to building the market for impact finance investing in Germany and Europe, one of our key learnings was really, let's say, the learnings from concrete case examples that can help also then inspire others and to get commitment for the direction. That's also a bit the background for the question.
Yeah, maybe Ali, with your international experience, is there any best practices or case studies that you can allude to in this round?
Yeah, so like I said, we have now about 37 case studies, and I'm so keen to start sharing them. We just are working with the people that actually provided the information, just making sure that everybody's comfortable with us sharing this information. So we will have many inspirational examples to share very soon. So that's something that I'm keen to share, and I can actually share with the organizers too once that's available, so that whoever's interested can look at those. Other case studies that are already available, as Dominic mentioned, MIT just published a case study on the food system in the US, and that one's available for distribution. Yeah, so I think that's a really comprehensive one that was really great, well done, and supported by TransCap initiative and sort of bringing that out into the world. And yeah, happy to share more soon. And I wish I could already do it now, but it's just not in a position yet.
I can add one more. It's an organization called Builders Vision, which is funded by Lucas Walton, one of the Walmart family descendants. And what makes Builders Vision interesting is that they take a systems mindset to solving for the challenges they care about. One of them is oceans, healthy oceans. And they have structured themselves in a way so that they have 4 different sort of pots of money that they can tap into. One is a market rate venture capital fund that only does market rate deals with a preference for growth equity stage kind of deals. One is a concessional capital fund where they can make investments in first-time fund managers, so indirect investments, but also direct into startups that wouldn't pass financial return criteria for the market rate investment fund. Then they have a philanthropic pot of money, a foundation, that they can use to fund all manner of things, including documentaries or civil society organizations, etc. And then finally, they have a pot of money that sits separate, which is legally allowed to fund advocacy and lobbying, because in the US, that needs to be separated. And so whenever they come across an innovation that fits their systemic theory of change, they try and understand in what kind of bucket does it fit best. And you can go on their website. They just published a pretty interesting impact report that describes some of this approach. Now, the thing that makes this a little unique is that there is a single principle with agency over all of these kinds of monies. If you were to have multiple principles or sources of, for this capital, you'd have to have a governance structure. And so then there's a question of how do you govern the construct so that it does act strategically and in alignment in a way that works for everybody's particular circumstances.
Right. Yeah, that sounds like a fascinating method. It'd be super nice to get that shared as well with our participants. I saw 2 comments / questions in chat from Yu Young Chin Choi from BEE. One even has a quote from David Foster Wallace. Maybe you want to allude to this one, or the earlier one, which also touches upon the role of advocacy and lobbying in system change legislation. Yeah, feel free to choose what direction you want to go to here.
No, maybe just very briefly, in the interest of time, I noticed, or my interest is just making sure that we are, as a community of impact investors, more political. I think we need to be more political, and be more aware of the power of the rule of law. And, when we want to transform systems, I think of it like there are, goals, norms, rules, paradigms, and they all are based on legislation, on current laws. And through functional democracy, we can work to change them. And impact investors are dependent on, the rules to be designed the right way so that, profitability, financial return, and so on go hand in hand with positive impact, much more than is currently the case. So, yeah, it's the main point I wanted to make. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that. Any responses to this directly, or maybe another question or comment?
Yeah, I'll just respond to that and say, I agree with you. I think that, at least from what I've seen so far, is a lot of investors are quite hesitant and scared almost, or hesitant maybe is the word, to engage with policy. But then we have seen some really incredible examples. Like one of them actually is from the Gatsby Foundation in the UK. It's a foundation that's been very active in East Africa. And they've been working incredibly successful with local governments in really, and using that as a tool for change, able to create the system change that they want in aquaculture in this example specifically. And so I'm hoping that with more examples like that, we can help investors become a little bit more comfortable and engaging with policymakers, kind of breaking that silo that currently exists between policy and government and investors, and see more collaboration between those two, because ultimately they often want the same thing. It's just they're working completely separate from each other.
Right.
Yeah, I can only underline that. I mean, funding more political innovations and also policy work, I think is key. But then also thinking about policies also have to be implemented. So, once a policy has been passed, doesn't mean that it has created the impact. So also think, when you think about policy work, also think about then funding or supporting the implementation and thinking about that holistically. So in Germany, for example, just to give an example, is we have and I have no idea how you pronounce or how you translate that into English, but it's the Mehrwegangebotspflicht, which is you have to be, so as a consumer, you can go into any restaurant and you can ask for reusable packaging and they have to provide it to you. But the problem is consumers don't know that and restaurants don't know that, right? So we have a policy that is in place, and but yet it doesn't create the impact because there's not enough people to follow up on that and actually make sure it's implemented and put in place. So that's just one example, but really think about the implementation of policy as well.
Yeah, thanks, Henrike. We've got a couple of comments here also on the Menti that sort of speaks to aligning different incentives, different stakeholder groups, and really having them work together to execute systemic investing successfully. I've thought was fascinating, Dominic, when you were talking about your strategic capital intermediary organization, which kind of points to these the need for bringing together stakeholders. Maybe you can just share a bit more on your progress on what thoughts you're having there, and if this organization would be a public organization, or would it be aligned with the government? How are you thinking about this organization to function, and where would it how would it align also with different actors in a certain ecosystem?
So it would almost certainly have to be a disinterested party, i.e. a nonprofit with its own governance structure. Otherwise, the power dynamics will not play out well. It would almost certainly have to have some sort of public mandate. Otherwise, there's going to be it's going to be torn apart politically. The challenge is that, and maybe this is a challenge unique to Switzerland, the challenge will be to find somebody who's interested in this, to find a problem owner. Because very few people actually, I mean, particularly in government, and don't take this the wrong way if you have any government people here, very few people care about the effectiveness of how taxpayer money is allocated. Some parties do. That's one of their main interests. In a place like Switzerland that is relatively wealthy, I think the going narrative is that at some point we'll just, we'll be fine. We'll just kind of spend our way out of the crisis. And it doesn't matter if we have subsidy programs that aren't really effective or that are sort of mere wealth redistribution programs. Because you need somebody at the top of government to care about strategic coordination, to care about policy coherence and all of these things. And very few people who care about social issues or societal issues also care about the financing side of things, right? The people who are experts on financing, say, or investments in the economy tends to be in a place on the political spectrum where sustainability and social challenges aren't really high up on the agenda. So it's the strategic challenge for us is here to find a problem owner. And then the banks, they throw up their hands and say, well, look at us, we're doing so much. We've got all of these ESG public equity funds, and here's a green bond that we're offering. And they're not really in the game either. And the pension funds say, that's not our mandate. And then the ones who are willing to come along on the journey, the progressive private wealth impact investors, are really important to, as sort of a beachhead market, to kind of, get the thing going, but ultimately won't have the volumes that matter. And, and there's only so much you can ask them to do, particularly for things that very clearly require state finance or philanthropy.
Right. Yeah, thanks for sharing those insights as well. We've got one hand raised. Daniel, is it a question or a comment from your end?
Perhaps it's something in between.
Lovely. Go for it.
Okay, hi, my name is Daniel. I'm one of the former founders of Pioniere. That's probably someone of you would know. And I'm now founder of Neopol, which is a new kind of organization which tries to at least tries to improve the financial situation of the most non-profits here in Germany. But to be honest, we haven't found financing for the last 2 or 3 years. So we really struggled with the problem. We didn't have a Pioniere. To be like Henrike said, we need more, or the work of orchestrators is important. So that's what we can really feel on the ground. But it's a question that really comes up in my mind all the time when you think about social innovations and how we finance them. And it's a question on the ground. I'm really wondering if we think about systems, natural systems. It's just a hypothesis, but I think I'm not sure if in nature we would find systems that come into crisis. Probably not. Usually they just evolve and they are part of the evolution and they just develop. And only with human, now we have to face the problem of crisis. Now we are on hyper crisis. And the question is, why do we talk at all about why is systemic change necessary at all? And if we speak about the fact of financing, it's in a more general view. It's about that systems get enough energy. So and the question is, why do our systems don't have enough energy to evolve, to change themselves? And for me, and that's the thing that I thought several years already, you have to talk about trauma. Because usually trauma is something when a system is not able to evolve out of itself anymore, just by natural things. So and I think if we don't really look on this topic and really understand it, we won't be able to solve the problem, how it gets enough energy flow, which means in our words to say how it gets enough finance. So and I think we haven't solved it. It's more a question about consciousness, and if we have really looked on the problem, and then getting more in collective power. Because I see, you know, at Pioniere, we talked about collective power since 15 years. And I haven't seen the right answers yet, to be honest. Yeah. So that's just more something I wanted to get in, and I would really keen to know what you think about this point.
I'm happy to jump in here just with, thank you for raising that, Daniel. One of the examples that comes to mind actually is one of the case studies we had was in Hawaii, and it was an initiative that was looking to change the food system in Hawaii, but there's deep trauma there in Hawaii, particularly around indigenous communities. And so before they could do any type of change initiative there, it was really about starting to look at that trauma, the collective trauma that was there, and not just, and sort of bring all these different stakeholders together, the indigenous entrepreneurs, the funders, and government and other stakeholders to collectively first look at that and start talking about that before they then started to look into the solutions to this. And so, I don't know, when you brought this up, it just made me think of that and just needing to, yeah, it's difficult to ignore those pieces of in the system. And obviously that's going to look different in each system, in each context, depending on what you're looking to change and who you're looking to change it for or with. But yeah, it's definitely something to be conscious of.
Any other comments on Daniel's point?
I mean, maybe just a few ideas. Obviously, it's quite a large question that you posed, but overall, so obviously these crises are so interconnected and they happen so fast, one after the other, or even concurrently, that I think we almost at some points require new ways of organizing ourselves, almost a new architecture or infrastructure, or whatever the right word is, of how as society, as democratic societies, we organize ourselves and then be able to respond to these crises. So there's almost like a new architecture, new infrastructure that needs to be put in place. I think in general and overarching. So that's one, and then the other is also crises. You know, as difficult and as terrible as they are, they obviously also have some sort of momentum and create energy. So in some cases, crises also make it easier to change certain structures and approaches. And, you know, people are willing to make faster decisions, you know, respond in new and other ways. But then it's just key. So whatever you're able to do in a crisis situation, in an acute crisis situation, it's also key to learn from that and try and build longer lasting processes. So processes that don't just work in a crisis situation, but also beyond. So I think that's maybe just two ideas that I wanted to add here.
Thanks a lot, Henrike. I hope that gives some insight on how to think about this issue for you, Daniel. Looking at chat, we had one more comment on the type of capital, namely from Björn. You said that the scarcest resource seems to be flexible, patient, concessionary capital and not investment. So we should not attach too much importance to investors, but to venture philanthropy, venture in brackets, public funding, impact first capital. Yeah, maybe let's get into that type of the discussion as well. We're talking a bit more about types of capital. Björn, do you want to elaborate on this question, or should we hand it over to our speakers straight away?
Sure, happy to give some context. So first, it's really a great topic, and how could we not agree on addressing the root causes and the system, etc. And I was actually one also pointing to the policymakers, because Dominic, you made a great point that it's a question of mindset. And I think this is the typical mindset policymakers should have, right? that's their role, that's their mandate. And getting them on board, for me, is just a question of feasibility, that we are not running against the current or swimming against the current. And when it comes to the type of capital, I'm wondering why, so we talk about investing here mainly, right? So most of the narratives we used here were from the investment universe. And I don't think that this is appropriate. I think we have really seen that we need the whole spectrum. And I think we should start with the most concessional pieces we need and then take it from there. And I was always thinking that investors will come when the conditions are good. And we should not start with market rate investing. This will come at some point, right? We should rather fix, actually, or address the gaps that are there, that we can solve without market-based investment, and then leave it to the investors to do their thing. Yeah, maybe a to make a long story short, just a bit challenging the question, why do we talk so much about investment and not other forms of finance?
So I'm going to attempt to answer this. Obviously, I'm not going to disagree with Björn. So everything he said is right. But there's a couple of maybe different perspectives I can offer. The first is on the question of why are we talking about investing? In our world, that's partially a tactical choice, because, and in fact, when we go out and we speak to different audiences, we do change the language. So when we go and talk to foundations, we talk much more about funding systems change. Funding is the word that resonates with them. When we go and talk to the public sector, we often use the word financing because that makes more sense to them. So we do change the language. Partially why we're sticking to investing is because the investor community is where this work has resonated the strongest, particularly the most progressive pockets of the impact investing space. And they really take to the language. Now, depending on what perspective you take, you can say everything's an investment, right? Public spending is an investment, philanthropy is an investment. In the narrowest sense, if you Googled investing and you clicked on an Investopedia link, obviously, we think of investing as a set of specific asset classes. So you have a point there, but I would sort of encourage you not to get hung up on that. And then in terms of whether or not market rate investment capital will just follow, I think there are a number of sort of implicit assumptions that you make in there, including, around the efficiency of capital markets, but also around what sets the thresholds for these types of capital to engage in the first place. And there's an argument to be made about risk-return expectations, which are rooted in the past, that they need to be adjusted because they cannot remain the same as we transition from what's an extractive, exclusionary economic system to a more sustainable, inclusive economic system. Some people will argue that risk-return ratios need to come down as a result of that. Risk-return expectations of so-called market rate capital needs to come down as well. Now, I'm not going to go there because, into more detail, because that's a philosophical point and you may well disagree or even call it out as naive, but it is at least a conversation that we need to have in society of whether those benchmarks are still right.
Yeah, maybe to add just one or two points on that. One is, let's definitely also talk about philanthropy. I gave a few examples there, right? So, because philanthropic money is probably some of the most flexible types of money that you can have, and that's really the reason why it should be it should be used to finance these large societal and political changes, because that's really where it can help the most, I think, in Germany. So agreed on that. And then maybe to the other point, I also do believe that we need a conversation around what actually mean, like what creates value in our society, and what do we mean by value? Because lots of the things that all of us intuitively would say we value most, like our health, our democracy, the education of our children, doesn't have a business case, but we actually, value it the most. So is that like, do we actually, so there's a complete mismatch between what we value financially and what we actually value as people in society. So I definitely do think we need some sort of conversation on that as well. But that's a very long-term conversation to have, obviously.
And we only have limited time today, and we're actually already coming up to our last 15 minutes. So I think I'll just open the room one more time for any last question or comment, and otherwise we'll start wrapping things up. I hope this is visible for everybody. As already mentioned, we've got 2 more deep dives coming up. The next one will be on blended finance and public-private financing. We'll have 2 very interesting speakers coming up again, with Madeleine Clark from Genio and Markus Freiburg from Phase giving some more insights on the German context. And then the next deep dive in the making will be more on a systemic or holistic level again, and we'll be talking about wholesaler, market builder concepts, and how to really build an ecosystem for social finance in Germany sustainably. The dates are still to be confirmed, but stay tuned for the invite to the deep dive to come. We're currently aiming for mid to end February for our next session. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, if I can, or not, and move on to our last slide. Thank you, everybody, for joining the Taskforce Deep Dive of today. Also, a very warm thank you again to our speakers, Dominic, Henrike, and Ali. You've really given us super valuable insights, and I hope that our German ecosystem can really learn from what you've brought to the table today, and can all move on to build an ecosystem for social finance and financing social innovations in Germany. And with that, I wish you all a wonderful evening, and hope to see you next time in the next deep dive of the task force. Thanks, everybody.